Well, hello, everyone. I am Billy Dees. Welcome to the podcast. If you have never checked out our program before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. Now, you can find the Billy Dees podcast pretty much on all of the various podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify. That's where most of our listens come from. We're also on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn. The list goes on. You can also find me on Twitter. That's kind of my social media home at Billy Dees. Billy Dees on Twitter. You can tweet at me as well. I generally try to at least acknowledge, if not reply, to various tweets, but you have to be nice. You don't have to agree, but you have to be nice. Mean-spirited comments are ignored. The topic for today is going to center around conversations. And what I mean by that specifically is when you have a conversation with someone, and let's say, presumably, it is a confidential one, or at the very least, one that you feel is happening just between you and the other person. And let's say it's taped, or at the very least, one of the people involved goes out and talks about that conversation with other people. Now, obviously, it really depends on the context and what the information was and what the circumstances were. But as a general rule, I do not like it when this happens, especially when it comes to public figures, whether they be famous people, politicians, what have you. And this happened again with Donald Trump. Now, a tape has surfaced, and the details of this you can search out if you're that interested. I really don't want this to turn into a political conversation, pro or con, about Donald Trump. That's not where I'm going with this. But he was taped at a dinner. Apparently, this was a fundraiser back in 2018, and he was talking about the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine. And he made some sort of a comment that she needs to be fired, something along those lines. So what I am going to talk about today is why I do not like those kinds of things going on. I didn't like it when it was done to Obama, with they cling to their Bibles and their guns and all those other things. And I don't like it when it's done to anyone. So this isn't necessarily pro or con about Donald Trump. And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. I do want to tell you about a couple past episodes. Here again, you can find us on any number of platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so on. Check out our playlist. I have a couple of really good interviews on there from some authors for HO Press and Shore House Books. And by the way, you got to check out the fine folks at humoroutcasts.com, the place to take a humor break. You can actually find these podcasts as well on their website. Simply go to humoroutcast.com, click on the podcast tab, and there you go. One of the interviews is with Patricia H. McLeod, and she is the author of The Green Goddess of Gardening. And some great tips about if you want to have a nice garden, if you want to have potted plants and so on. Really interesting stuff if you are interested at all in having a nice green garden or patio, what have you, come this spring and wintertime. Sometimes you have to get busy. You have to get busy. And the other interview that I would like you to check out is with Concha Alborg. Now, she is the author of My Mother, That Stranger, Letters from the Spanish Civil War. Let me try that again. Letters from the Spanish Civil War. This is a great interview all the way around. If you have an appreciation of history, if you enjoy the stories of human beings and their journeys, and immigrants, we could go on and on and on. Concha Alborg, the author, My Mother, That Stranger, Letters from the Spanish Civil War. Both of these books are available on Amazon, and here again, they're also part of our playlist right here on the Billy Dees podcast. All right, getting back to disclosing the information that was discussed in a conversation or recording it and why I don't like it. Now, I suppose some people could make the argument that when it is a president, there is a historical context there. And I'll give you that. But most of the time, when people write books or they have things that were said, they're political hit jobs. Okay. The idea that all these things are fair game because there's a historical context there, that's BS. All right. In my opinion, that is absolute BS. Here's why I don't like it. I myself, I've been in business in one shape or another, either for myself or working for other people for many, many years. And there have been times, let's say, for example, we have had a problem account. We've had a problem customer. And it's been presented to me behind closed doors. You know, if somebody comes in and says, Bill, we got to talk about so-and-so. All right. And in that moment, I might go off. What does that SOB want? What does he want us to do it for free? What's his problem? Okay. And I could go on and on and on. And then we both settle down, we both vent, and then we design a new strategy. Well, let's try to form it like this. Maybe we can do this for him instead of that, change the price here or there, and, find out where this goes. And 90% of the time, the situation gets resolved. It's no big deal. You move on, okay? But if somebody would have taped me in that moment and taken that period of venting there and played it for someone, now it has a completely different feel. It leaves the impression that that's the way Bill feels about his customers. And that's just simply not true. And we do it to public figures all the time. And that's why so many of them feel isolated. They don't know who they can trust. Another example would be, let's say that you are the president of the United States, and I am your trusted, quote unquote, trusted advisor. And we have an international crisis. Troops are on the border of one of our allies. And we discuss the diplomacy. What can we do about trying to reason this out? And then we discuss, bringing some battleships to the region and all these other options. And I say to you, Mr. or Mrs. President, we have to talk about something here. This is very delicate, but it could happen. The enemy could arm their nuclear missiles. And we have to be ready for that. We have to know what the response is going to be. So we should talk to our military advisors, design what that is going to be. We have to have that ready. If the unimaginable does happen, that these missiles would go hot, we have to be ready for that cataclysmic, dreadful moment, just in case. We can't be debating it when the missiles of our enemies are going into the air. And you say, that's right, Bill. It's horrible, but we better have that ready. We can't mess around. Okay? Well, time goes on, and you, being the fine president that you are, you handle the situation. We move on. And then a couple years after you're out of office, I write a book. And I say, when the president was ready to use nuclear weapons. Now, is that true? Did that moment happen? Yes. But it has a whole different ring to it now. And it's used to sell the book. I'm using that moment as a teaser to sell my book. There's no historical context here. It's a cheap exploitation of a confidential conversation that I had with you to sell my book. Another aspect of this that gets forgotten when these tapes are played is, especially when it comes to talking dirt, the locker room scenario. And it's not just something that men do, okay? It's something that I can talk about as a man because I happen to be one. And contrary to what you may believe, I am not a saint. There was a time in my life where, when I was younger, especially when it came to business, when I was doing the DJing thing when I was younger, and all of these other things, I was probably, a lot of people back then would probably describe me as cocky. Okay, so I've matured over the years. I was never one to speak badly about women, but here again, this is something I just want to present a case, a hypothetical case, where these things don't often get considered when these recordings or references to dirty talking come up. And here again, being in the nightclub industry, being a disc jockey, being around bands, being around comedians backstage. And let me tell you something. If you've ever worked with a group of people at a nightclub and you go out to breakfast at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning after work, you're going to hear some really, really bad stuff. Okay, you're going to hear everything about men, women, whatever. Okay, and it's the way that those things are spoken about in those situations, and that's important. Because if you are at a table with a bunch of nightclub workers after work at 3 o'clock in the morning at an all-night diner, that is a different audience than some other time, and that's very important. Okay, it's not that you're being someone that you're not. It's not pretending to be somebody else and all that other stuff that people conjure up. It's just you have to know your audience. Okay, there were things that I would say on a stage in a comedy club that I would never say at my day job doing a business presentation at a country club. Now, that's just common sense. But anyway, like I said, I'm going to talk mostly about this from the perspective of men, but I can tell you all people do this. A couple of times, one time in particular, I can recall being out at one of these breakfast little get-togethers after work, and a female bartender was at our table, and she went through this 10-minute routine, I'll call it, of her ex-boyfriend's penis and how it didn't have a head. Okay. And a lot of these things that she was talking about were not only crude, but they were mean. They were very mean. Now, naturally, everybody at this table is in hysterics. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we were somewhere where I would have left a mic open or a camera had been rolling and she had been taped. And years later, she's running for Congress. Okay? And for whatever reason, her campaign is getting national attention. And I come up with this tape talking so crudely and so mean about a man's genitalia. And by the way, if that situation was flipped, if it was a man talking about female genitalia in that mean-spirited way, completely different conversation. And we'll have that maybe another time, another place. That's even worse for whatever reason, but it would be bad for her as well. It would be hard for her to explain while she was performing a sex act on a man. She discovered his traits, his physical traits, and was ridiculing him publicly for it. Now, here again, would that be fair? She was having that conversation with presumably friends, work companions at 3 o'clock in the morning in a diner that was almost empty. Did she ever want that conversation publicly spread around on the 6 o'clock news where families are watching? Okay, now let's take a similar situation with all men. And I can speak about men because I am a man. I believe me, I don't know everything. And everybody's different. We all know that. And we also know that women talk among themselves in a way that's unique to them. And that's really what this is all about. That's the point I'm trying to make. is we interact with people, we talk to a certain audience, we relate to them in a certain way that we would not to another group. All right? And I've been in this situation probably a million times. Let's say a bunch of guys go out during the middle of the week and they feast on chicken wings and they have these big conversations about all these beers that I know nothing about because I don't really drink. But we're having a good time. And all of a sudden, one of them stands up and says, all right, well, I guess I got to get going, guys. It's been real, but it's getting late and I got to get home and give it to the old lady tonight. If I don't give it to her real good, she's a real bitch in the morning. And everybody starts laughing. Yeah, Tom, go home and give it to her. Blah, 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 blah. All right. Now, is that crude? Yeah. But is it really what's happening? No. What's really happening is he's standing up and saying, hey, guys, I'm having a real good time, and we're going to have to do this again, but it's getting late, and I was really looking forward to spending some time with my wife tonight. And everybody at the table knows that's what he's saying. Everybody knows it because they know him, and they know his heart, and they know what he's all about. And he's just being a man. He's being humorous in the way that he knows how. And he's feeding his libido maybe a little bit. He wants to feel, like virile and all these other things. And it's completely harmless. But here's the thing. Let's suppose somebody taped him. And he was running for mayor. And they presented it as, listen to how the mayor talks about his wife. This is how he feels about women and how they should be treated. Would that be fair? He never intended that banter with his friends, with people that know him, to be public consumption. And I just really have a hard time with trust being violated in that way. And as a matter of fact, I would also add that I don't necessarily have a problem with someone talking about sexual things and the various sexual experiences that they've had. I don't like it when they talk about someone specific. Okay, it's one thing to listen to women talking about men coming in all different shapes and sizes, and I'm not talking about how tall they are. It's another thing to listen to men talk about breast sizes and all these other things and how they hang or what have you. It's another thing to have those types of conversations and identify the person that you're talking about. That I don't like. When someone shares a moment like that with you, whether it's a one-night stand or whether it's someone that you've been with for years, when they become naked with you, I feel that you have an ethical obligation not to describe the most intimate parts of their body. I feel that's really bad. I really, when I'm sitting and listening to that, I really don't find it humorous. The humor gets lost when someone is violated in that way. Here again, speaking in generalities, talking about past experiences in general, this experience that I had with someone at one time, that's fine. But when you assign a name and an identity to it, I really don't like that. I don't like it when men do it, and I don't like it when women do it. And I'm not one for raunchy talk anyway, and I'm certainly not one for speaking about women in strictly sexual terms. I never have been. But I understand the banter. I understand the context of a private conversation. I understand when you're in a closed-door meeting and you're having a heated discussion about a customer or your competitor. Whatever, you're going to call them names. You're going to do things. You're going to say things about them that you would never intend to present to them. It's a matter of venting. And you talk about options in a boardroom where, you're exploring your options. Sometimes you have to explore the worst options to know what the alternatives are. And to have those little moments taken from you and presented as this is the person that you are, I feel is very unfair. I don't know if I made that clear today in my discussion or not, but I tried. That was the best I could do. Billy D's right here, Billy D's podcast. Very much appreciate the listeners. Always do comment, tweet me, what have you on Twitter at Billy D's. I am Billy D's, and this has been the Billy D's podcast. Well, hello, everyone. I am Billy D's from the self-titled Billy D's podcast. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and many more of the best podcast networks. Join me for my commentary and interviews. Follow me on Twitter, real easy to find, at Billy D's. I am Billy D's. I'd love to have you listen in.